Sometimes the quietest stories begin with the smallest sound, a breath, a whisper, the faint rustle of fur against blankets. Long before anyone thought to notice him, long before his name would echo in strange and wondrous ways, there was only a pup with bright eyes and a heart that seemed far too large for his little body. He dreamed more than he played, and when he played, it always carried a kind of searching, as if every tumble, every bark, every chase through the grass was reaching toward something unseen. The others thought it was simple restlessness, but there was a softness in him that no one could quite explain. At night, when the family slept and the house grew still, he would lie awake and listen, not for danger, not for footsteps or creaks, but for the hush between things, the silence that held all the secrets. In that silence he felt the world open a little wider. Sometimes he imagined he could almost hear thoughts floating like stars. Above him, thoughts that were not his own but brushed against him in tender sparks. He didn't understand them, not fully, but he felt their warmth. There was a strangeness even in the way he dreamed. Other dogs dreamed of chasing, of running, of scent and sound and joy. His dreams, however, were filled with images of standing, upright, of speaking in words, of holding tools he had never seen before. They frightened him sometimes, but only in the way thunder does, loud, inevitable, yet beautiful in its own way. When he woke, his heart beat softly, as though the dream itself had stayed behind to whisper. The family noticed small things, though they didn't speak of them often. His gaze lingered too long, as though he understood more than he should. When the little boy cried, the pup would press his head against the child's hand and stay, unmoving, until the sobs melted into sleep. When the father sighed at the end of a long day, the pup would sit at his feet, quiet and still, as though to share the burden. These were not the actions of instinct alone. They carried intention, a listening heart. He grew slowly, and with growth came more strangeness. Sometimes he would paw at objects, not because he wanted to chew them, but because he wanted to feel their weight, their balance, their shape. The world was not just a playground for him. It was a puzzle, soft yet endless, waiting for him to fit its pieces together. The boy would laugh and say, "You're too smart for a dog," and the pup would wag his tail, but deep inside he wondered if it was true. There were nights when the moonlight made the room glow silver, and he would stand at the window, pause, pressed against the glass, gazing at the world outside. Somewhere deep in him, something stirred, a longing he couldn't name. It wasn't the longing of hunger or the desire to run in open fields. It was the kind of yearning that belongs to travelers who haven't yet begun their journey, to singers who haven't yet heard their own voice. He didn't know why he felt it, only that it grew stronger with each passing night. One evening, the boy whispered to him in the dark, half asleep, "You're not just a pet, are you?" The pup tilted his head, unable to reply, but his heart throbbed with a strange recognition, as though the child had pulled a secret into the open. That moment lingered like a warm ember, and from then on, every glance, every touch, every dream carried a quiet promise that something within him was waiting to awaken. And so his nights stretched into something more than rest. They became little passages of wonder, windows into a world he couldn't yet name. He was still small, still dependent on the family who loved him, but in the hush of the midnight hours, he began to believe there was more written for him than the ordinary life of a household pet. The silence had been teaching him, shaping him, preparing him. The boy's words had given it a voice. In those early days, he did not fight the strangeness or rush to understand it. He simply carried it, like a melody hummed under the breath, soft and unfinished. He did not know yet where it would lead, but in his heart a quiet certainty was forming, that his story was only just beginning, and that one day the whispers he heard in the silence would rise into something the whole world could not ignore. The boy's whispered question lingered long after the night had passed. It clung to the pup like a shadow of light, not heavy, not dark, but softly persistent. He wasn't just a pet, at least not in the way others thought. The boy had seen it, even if he hadn't meant to, even if he would forget those words come morning. From that night on, the pup carried them like a secret, stitched into his chest. They gave shape to the quiet stirring inside him, a stirring that made every ordinary moment feel quietly extraordinary. The days that followed were tender but strange. He would run across the yard with his paws kicking up dust, ears flapping wildly, just another happy dog in the sunlight. Yet, even in his play, he felt something deeper. The grass was not just grass, it was a map of textures, a living quilt beneath him. The wind wasn't just air rushing past, it was a language, carrying voices he could almost understand. When the boy threw a stick, the game was never just about returning it. For him, it was a study in arcs, in motion, in the rhythm of a hand, letting go and a piece of wood, flying into possibility. The family laughed and loved him without restraint. They didn't notice that when they spoke, he listened as though memorizing each syllable. The mother hummed while washing dishes, and he memorized the notes until he could almost feel them vibrating in his own chest. The father spoke sternly when he tracked mud into the kitchen, and though he wagged his tail in apology, a part of him was quietly storing away the meaning of words. The boy, his truest companion, would sometimes ramble late into the night, telling secrets, fears, or half-imagined tales. The pup listened, with his head resting on the child's knee, breathing in rhythm, learning not only the words, but the emotions woven between them. There were moments of quiet strangeness that only he seemed to notice. Sometimes, when the boy's sadness grew heavy, the pup would feel it like a weight pressing on his own chest. He would nuzzle the boy's hand, and in that touch a strange exchange occurred. Some of the heaviness lifted, flowing away like water, and though the pup couldn't explain why, he knew he had given something of himself to ease the burden. Other times, when laughter filled the room, it wasn't just sound, it was warmth spreading across his fur, lightening every part of him. He was not only living beside them, he was somehow living through them, sharing pieces of his being with theirs. He began to notice his dreams changing. No longer were they fleeting flashes of upright steps or tools he couldn't name. Now the dreams carried feelings as real as the waking day. He would dream of speaking to the boy, of telling him everything he felt, but could not show with tail and paw. He would dream of building, of shaping, of creating a space where his kind could be understood, not dismissed as lesser. Each dream left him with a strange mix of comfort and longing, like a lullaby half forgotten the moment one wakes. The nights grew more vivid too. The silver glow of the moon seemed to touch him differently now. It traced his outline, shimmered against his fur, and sometimes he wondered if it was trying to tell him something. He would sit by the window watching the stars, his reflection, gazing back at him, and he felt both small and infinite at once. The silence of the house would wrap around him, and in that silence the whispers seemed stronger, as though the world itself was calling him towards something just beyond reach. Still, he remained gentle, playful, and devoted. To the family, he was their loyal companion, nothing more, nothing less. He accepted their love with gratitude, even as his inner world grew richer. He knew, though without words, that love was not a cage. It was an anchor, a grounding force that would carry him through whatever strangeness lay ahead. When the boy scratched behind his ears and whispered, "Good night, buddy," the pup closed his eyes, not only comforted but also quietly determined to live up to that bond. As weeks turned into months, his small quirks became more noticeable. He lingered too long at the sound of the television, his head tilting as though trying to unravel the meaning of conversations. He placed his toys in deliberate patterns, not scattered chaos, but arrangements that seemed to make sense only to him. The boy would laugh and say, "You're weird," but behind the laughter was affection, not suspicion. The pup wagged his tail, hiding his secret, though a part of him longed to share it one day. And yet beneath all of this there was a quiet ache. The ache of being understood only halfway. The boy felt closest to bridging that gap, but even he could not cross it fully. Sometimes, when they locked eyes, the pup wondered if he could somehow push the thoughts out, make the boy hear them in his mind. But the thoughts stayed inside, glowing softly, waiting. The ache was not unbearable. It was the kind of ache that guides one forward, like the first pull of a tide. The boy never knew how often the pup stayed awake long after he had fallen asleep, listening to the rhythm of his breath. Each rise and fall felt like a promise that as long as they had each other, nothing would be too heavy to carry. And in those quiet hours, as the pup drifted between wakefulness and dreams, he felt that something within him was still unfolding, still waiting for its time. The secret had not revealed itself fully yet, but its roots were deepening. What had begun as strange whispers in the night was slowly becoming something undeniable. He was no longer simply dreaming of more, he was beginning to sense that one day more would come. And though he could not name it, though he could not speak it, the boy's words echoed softly in his memory. "You're not just a pet, are you?" That question was no longer only a question. It was becoming an answer he had yet to discover, and the path toward it was already unfolding beneath his quiet, steady paws. The question had rooted itself so deeply within him that it seemed to grow each day as natural as breath. "You're not just a pet, are you?" The words became a quiet drumbeat beneath every moment of his life, soft but insistent, urging him towards something unseen. At first, it was only a feeling, a restlessness in his chest, but soon the world itself began to shift around him, as though it too was conspiring to reveal the truth. The changes were subtle, almost imperceptible, but to him they felt immense. One evening, the boy left a puzzle scattered on the carpet, its bright pieces lying in uneven clusters. The pup padded over, sniffed at them, and instead of nosing them into chaos as any other dog might, he began to push them into place. At first it was clumsy, the pieces nudging against each other without fitting. Yet somehow he understood what belonged together. He felt the shapes calling to each other, edges yearning to meet. The boy returned to find two corners neatly aligned and laughed, not in suspicion, but in delight. "You're helping me, huh?" he said, ruffling the pup's fur. The pup wagged his tail, hiding the truth of what had happened, but inside he knew this was not play. It was awakening. Nights became heavier with strange clarity. Dreams no longer dissolved upon waking. They clung like dew on his fur, shimmering with meaning. He would dream of opening doors, not with paws, but with hands that felt both alien and familiar. He would dream of speaking to the boy, his own voice trembling with words of comfort, of asking questions he had always carried in silence. And when he awoke, the yearning was sharper. the sense that something inside him was pushing against the boundaries of what he had always been told he was. The whispers in the silence grew louder too. It was as though the stillness of the house at night carried a secret frequency, and he was the only one tuned to hear it. Sometimes it came as faint echoes of thought, like half-finished sentences forming in the dark. Other times, it was more, like a gentle hum, a vibration he felt in his chest, guiding him. He did not know if the voices were his own imagination or something greater reaching through, but he knew they were real enough to change him. During the days, the family's love anchored him, but he could not deny the strangeness they never saw. Once, when the boy's toy rolled beneath the couch, the pup crouched low and reached. His paw pressed against the toy, and for a brief, shimmering instant, it felt as though his reach extended farther than it should have, like invisible fingers curling through the shadows. The toy slid closer, not in the jerky scrape of a paw, but in a smooth, deliberate motion. The boy clapped his hands, thrilled. "Good boy!" he exclaimed, scooping the toy into his arms. The pup barked softly, tail wagging, but inside he trembled with the realization of what had just occurred. Something impossible had slipped quietly into the ordinary, and no one but him seemed to notice. The more it happened, the less afraid he became. At first, he thought of it as a burden, a strangeness too heavy to carry, but gradually he began to see it as a gift, though one he still didn't understand. The world looked different now. Every sound, every gesture, every glance carried weight, as though the universe was woven from invisible threads, and he had begun to glimpse them. When the mother dropped a plate and it shattered, he flinched not at the sound, but at the ripple of emotion that surged through her. Frustration, weariness, love still pulsing beneath it all. He could feel it, not just see it. He was beginning to live not only in his own body, but in the quiet pulse of others. And yet, with each new flicker of awakening, the ache of separation deepened. He longed more than ever to speak, to tell the boy everything, to ask him if he could feel the same currents, the same whispers. He longed to tell the family that he wasn't only a shadow at their feet, but a being who loved them in ways they couldn't yet fathom. But the words remained locked within him, waiting. The silence that once comforted him now teased him, promising answers, but offering only more patience. One night, as the boy slept with his arm draped lazily over the pup's back, a dream surged with such intensity that it felt less like sleep and more like revelation. In the dream, he stood tall, no longer small and low to the earth. His voice echoed, clear and resonant, calling out not just to the boy, but to many others like him. Around him stretched a city of strange lights, soft and glowing, a place that felt both alien and familiar. Dogs moved freely there, not as pets, but as equals, their eyes bright with understanding. And at the center of it all, he felt himself. Snowball, though the name had not yet been spoken, standing as though he had always belonged. When he awoke, dawn was spilling pale light across the window. He lay still, heart beating fast, unsure if he had glimpsed the future or only a dream. But one truth settled into him with quiet certainty. What he was becoming could no longer be ignored. The whispers had become a call, the dreams a map, and the stirrings within him a promise. He was no longer waiting for change to come. He was carrying it already, step by quiet step, towards something that would one day reshape not only his own life, but the lives of all around him. And though he could not yet name it, though he could not yet speak it, He felt in his bones that the world had begun to turn in a new direction, and that his paws were already pressing into the path of destiny. The dream of standing tall and speaking lingered in him long after the light of dawn had touched the room. He did not shake it off as he once might have. Instead, he carried it quietly, like a song that would not leave the mind. Each moment of the waking day seemed to echo with the dream's presence. The family's voices, the warmth of the boys, laughter, even the way sunlight moved across the floor. All of it felt heightened, as though the world was leaning closer, asking him to listen more carefully. He had begun to awaken to himself, but in that awakening, he also became more attuned to those who loved him. He found himself studying the humans with new depth, noticing not just their actions, but the emotions that stirred behind them. When the father returned home after long hours of work, his steps were heavy, his shoulders bowed. To the family, it was a simple return, but the pup felt the weight that pressed invisibly on the man. He padded quietly to his side, pressing his head against the man's ankle until the tension in his posture softened just slightly. It was not obedience that guided him, nor mere instinct. It was an understanding that had grown sharper, a knowing that love sometimes meant carrying burdens that were not your own. With the mother, it was different. She moved often in rhythms of care, her hands in constant motion, tidying, cooking, soothing. But beneath her quiet strength, he sensed a fatigue that no one else seemed to see. Sometimes, as she sat at the table with her head resting on one hand, the pup would curl beneath her chair, close enough that she could feel his presence if she shifted her feet. He never asked for her attention in those moments. He simply gave her his stillness, as though to remind her she was not alone. And when she reached down absent-mindedly to scratch behind his ears, he felt her gratitude in the gentleness of her touch. With the boy, however, everything was different. Their bond was not only love, but something unspoken, a shared current that flowed more deeply than either fully understood. The boy's laughter, his words, his dreams whispered aloud at night. They became the pup's compass. When the boy was joyful, it lifted him like a rising tide. When the boy was afraid, the pup felt the tremor in his own chest. More than once, he sensed the boy's silent worries, fears about school, about being small in a big world, about not always feeling understood. The pup's presence was his quiet answer, the steady heartbeat beside him when words fell short. The strangeness within him grew alongside these bonds. It was as though each act of love sharpened his senses further. He began to notice patterns that no one else did, the way voices shifted when moods changed, the tiny pauses in conversations that revealed more than words, the invisible threads connecting one heart to another. He could not explain it, but it was as if the world itself was teaching him how to see not just the surface of things, but the truth beneath. One evening, the boy sat cross-legged on the floor, building a tower of blocks. The pup watched intently, his eyes following every careful placement. When one block wobbled and the boy frowned, the pup leaned forward and nudged the base with his nose, just enough to steady it. The boy gasped, eyes wide, then broke into a grin. "You really are helping me," he whispered. In that moment, something passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. The boy didn't fully understand, but he believed in him. And the pup felt, for the first time, that perhaps he would not always have to keep his awakening a secret. Yet there was also unease. With each new moment of clarity, he sensed that this path would not always be simple. The world beyond the walls of their home loomed larger now, less like a backdrop and more like a horizon he would one day have to cross. The whispers in the silence still followed him, urging him forward, and though he trusted the love of his family, he knew that love alone might not be enough to hold the change that was coming. Still, he chose patience. He knew the value of waiting, of learning from those around him. The humans taught him in ways they did not realize. They taught him that strength was not loudness, but steadiness. They taught him that care often showed itself in the smallest gestures. They taught him that love was not a single moment, but a series of quiet choices made again and again. These lessons shaped him as much as the strange powers stirring inside. Night, when the boy drifted into sleep, the pup would lie awake and recall the day. He would replay the father's weary sigh, the mother's quiet hum, the boy's whispered dreams. He would weave them together like threads, forming a tapestry of understanding. And as he drifted toward sleep himself, the whispers returned, softer now, almost like a lullaby. They told him to listen, to wait, to grow. They told him that the time would come when his secret could no longer remain hidden. In the quiet darkness, he pressed closer to the boy, feeling the warmth of his small body, hearing the steady rhythm of his breath. It anchored him, reminding him why he was here, why the whispers mattered. He did not yet know the full shape of what he was becoming, but he knew this. He was learning not only what it meant to awaken, but what it meant to love, to carry, to belong. And in those lessons he felt the path ahead quietly unfolding, step by gentle step, leading him deeper into the mystery of who he was meant to be. The days passed with the gentle rhythm of ordinary life, yet beneath that rhythm a deeper current continued to stir. The pup had begun to understand his family in ways that reached far beyond the surface, but when night fell, something even more profound awaited him. His dreams were no longer fleeting glimpses of strange shapes or half-formed voices. They had begun to bloom with startling clarity, carrying him into places that felt both impossible and inevitable. At first they came like quiet visions, soft and translucent, fading as quickly as they arrived. But with each passing night, the visions lengthened, became steadier, more insistent, as though the dream world itself was no longer separate from his waking life. He would close his eyes beside the boy, the warmth of that small hand draped across his back, and the dream would draw him in with a slow, deliberate pull. In these dreams, he stood taller than he ever had before. He looked down at his own paws only to find them reshaped, elongated, capable of grasping. His reflection was no longer only that of a pup, but of something becoming. Yet it was not his form that struck him most, it was the world around him. Streets of shining stone stretched out, buildings that seemed to shimmer between reality and imagination, and at every corner others like him moved with intent and dignity. They were not pets, not leashed or bound, but beings with voices that carried across the dream air. He could hear them speaking, though the words were strange, and yet his heart understood them as if he had always known their meaning. They spoke of freedom, of belonging, of a place where love was not a chain but a bridge. And somewhere at the center of it all, he saw himself, not as a follower, but as a guide. These dreams did not leave him empty when he awoke. They lingered, saturating the morning with their aftertaste. He would pad across the kitchen floor, his nails clicking softly against the tiles, and feel the weight of the vision pressing against his chest, urging him to remember. The boy would chatter happily at the breakfast table, and though the pup wagged his tail and nuzzled his leg, His eyes often drifted toward the window, to the horizon beyond, as though searching for the city of light that only existed in sleep. The family, of course, did not know. To them, his restless nights were no more than a dog's peculiar habit. They laughed when he stirred in his sleep, paws twitching, ears flicking, as though chasing some phantom squirrel. But the truth was far stranger. He wasn't chasing, he was learning. Each dream was a lesson, a fragment of a larger truth waiting to be pieced together. One night, as the house sank into silence, the dream became more vivid than ever before. He found himself walking through a vast garden, its air thick with the fragrance of flowers he had never smelled yet somehow recognized. At the far end of the garden there was a gate, tall and glowing faintly, as though lit from within. He approached slowly, heart pounding, and as he did he heard a voice, not loud, not frightening, but steady and calm, like a whisper carried on the wind. The voice did not speak in words he could name, yet he understood. It told him that the longing he carried was not a mistake, that his ache to be more was not a curse, but a calling. It told him that the gifts stirring within him were not his alone, but threads in a much larger tapestry. When he awoke from this dream, the boy's hand was resting gently against his fur, and for a long while he did not move. He simply lay there, breathing in the stillness, carrying the weight of the voice like a secret jewel. He felt changed, not in body, but in certainty. He no longer questioned if what he felt was real. He knew it was, and that knowing shaped every glance, every step, every thought that followed. As days folded into nights and nights into days, his connection to the dreams grew stronger. He began to sense the border between waking and sleeping thinning, as though his dreams were pressing against the edges of reality. Sometimes, in the quiet moments of dawn, he would feel the echo of that voice, a faint hum in his chest, reminding him to stay patient, to keep listening. Other times, when the boy played beside him, he felt almost as though the dream's clarity was slipping into the waking world, guiding his pause, sharpening his awareness. Still, there was a gentleness in the way the change unfolded. Nothing rushed, nothing demanded. It was like the growth of a tree, silent, steady, inevitable. And as he grew deeper into his strange visions, he found that his love for the family did not wane. If anything, it deepened. The boy's laughter became a tether that anchored him to the present. The mother's quiet hum, the father's weary sighs, all wove into his being, grounding the vastness of his dreams in the ordinary beauty of their lives. But in the quiet of the night, when his eyes closed and the garden reappeared, he knew with the absolute certainty that the day would come when he could no longer remain only what they believed him to be. His dreams were not simply illusions. They were directions, gentle but undeniable, leading him toward a future that waited patiently for his arrival. And though he did not yet know when or how, he felt the truth settling into him like the rhythm of a heartbeat. One day, the dream would spill over into the waking world, and nothing would ever be the same again. The silence of the following nights carried a weight that felt different, as though the very air had shifted. The pup sensed it the moment he drifted into sleep. The familiar garden stretched before him, its blossoms swaying in a rhythm too perfect to belong to the waking world. But this time, he was not alone. A presence lingered at the edge of his vision, quiet, patient, and watching. He felt no fear, only an unspoken recognition, as though some part of him had always known this meeting would come. The figure did not reveal itself all at once. At first it was only a shadow beneath the trees, a faint outline that moved with deliberate grace. When it finally stepped forward, the pup's breath caught. It was another like him, yet older, carrying an air of stillness so profound that even the flowers seemed to bow in its presence. The stranger's eyes were deep, holding the calm of countless nights and the storm of hidden truths. The pup lowered, his head instinctively, not in submission but in acknowledgement, as though honoring something greater than himself. The being did not speak in words, yet the pup heard it clearly. The voice moved through his thoughts the way wind bends grass, soft yet undeniable. It called itself no name, gave no title, only offered a feeling: mentor, guide, witness. The pup understood without question. This was the one who would teach him to listen, not only to dreams, but to the silences between them. The first lesson came without command. The mentor simply stood, unmoving, and the pup felt the garden around him pulse with quiet energy. He realized that the silence was not empty at all. It was full, brimming with threads of meaning he had never noticed before. The rustle of leaves, the distant hum of unseen water, even the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Each sound carried a truth, if only he was patient enough to hear it. The mentor's stillness was the teaching, and the pup found himself breathing slower, his ears pricking, his awareness stretching outward. In the days that followed, the dreams repeated, each one returning him to the garden, each one guiding him back to the silent figure. The mentor rarely spoke, yet in that silence more was said than words could have carried. The pup learned to notice what lay beneath appearances, the way shadows curved not only because of light but because of intention, the way paths unfolded not only by design but by choice. The dreams sharpened him, not into something new, but into something truer, as though polishing away the dust that had covered his spirit since birth. Still, the boy and his family remained his anchor. He would wake from these lessons and find the boy curled against him, trust written in the soft rhythm of his sleep. That trust gave the pup strength, even as it deepened the tension within him. Each day he balanced two worlds, the warmth of a home where he was loved as a dog, and the silent call of dreams where he was being shaped into something more. The mentor never demanded he abandon one for the other. Instead, the lessons revealed how both belonged to him, how love and destiny were not enemies, but companions. The pup began to sense how the boy's laughter carried the same resonance as the garden's blossoms, how the mother's quiet songs hummed with the same rhythm as the dream's unseen water. The ordinary life was not separate from the extraordinary path. It was the foundation on which everything else would rise, yet as he grew in understanding, so too did the shadows at the edge of his visions. On one night, as he stood before the mentor, a sudden tremor ran through the dream. The blossoms bent sharply, as if struck by a harsh wind, and the distant hum turned into a low, rumbling growl. The pup bristled, fur rising, but the mentor remained calm. Its eyes glowed faintly, and though no words were spoken, the meaning was clear. The path ahead would not remain free of trial. The pup's heart thudded with both fear and determination. He did not yet know what danger lingered beyond the garden's gate, but he knew enough to understand that change was approaching, not slowly, but steadily. The silence he had learned to hear was not only peace, it was also warning. The pause. Before a storm breaks, when he awoke, dawn was only beginning to seep through the curtains. The boy stirred beside him, murmuring softly in his sleep, and the pup pressed closer, grounding himself in that fragile warmth. But even as he lay still, his mind echoed with the lessons of the night. He could not ignore the pull of destiny. The mentor had shown him how to listen, and now he could not unhear what waited in the quiet. From that day, he moved differently. His gaze lingered longer at doorways, his ears twitched at sounds no one else noticed, and his steps carried a weight that did not belong to an ordinary pup. The family saw only devotion in his watchfulness, but within him the teachings of silence grew roots. He was preparing, though he did not yet know for what. The mentor's lessons were no longer just dreams, they were seeds planted deep within him, seeds that would one day bloom into something the waking world could not ignore. And as another night approached, he felt the anticipation stir in his chest. The garden would call again, and with it, the figure of stillness. The lessons were not yet complete, and the silence was far from finished with him. The next dream arrived not as a gentle drift, but as a slow descent, like stepping into water that grew deeper with each breath. The pup found himself in the garden once more, yet it was not quite the same. The blossoms, once bright with quiet radiance, now seemed subdued, their colors dimmed as though veiled by a thin layer of ash. The air itself felt heavier, filled with a hush that pressed against him. He knew instantly that the moment had come, the one his mentor had prepared him for. The figure stood in its familiar stillness, watching him with those endless eyes that reflected both comfort and gravity. No words were spoken, but none were needed. The silence carried the message. The first trial was here. The pup's paws trembled slightly on the grass, not from weakness, but from awareness. His lessons had taught him to hear the subtleties within silence, and tonight that silence was charged, alive with an unseen presence lurking just beyond the edge of vision. At first, it was only a flicker, a ripple in the corner of his eye. The pup turned, ears straining, and the air quivered like a veil pulled back. Out from the shadows between the trees came a shape, not solid, but shifting, its form bending and curling as though made from smoke. It had no clear face, no sound of breath, only a low hum that set his chest vibrating. Yet within its formlessness lay something deeply familiar, an echo of doubt, fear, and loneliness he had once carried as a small pup, abandoned to uncertainty. The trial was not of strength, he realized, but of recognition. The shadow was not an enemy to be fought, but a reflection of himself, the part of him that had feared being nothing more than a creature bound by chains, powerless and unseen. His mentor remained unmoving, offering neither guidance nor interference. The choice was his alone. The shadow crept closer, its smoke-like body stretching across the grass, darkening the flowers it passed. The pup's heart thudded harder, yet his breath slowed as he remembered the lessons. Silence was not emptiness. Silence was listening. He closed his eyes and allowed the hum to flow through him, no longer resisting it, but opening himself to it. And as he did, he heard more than a sound. He heard a story. It was his own. The whimpers of his earliest nights, the ache of wanting warmth, the confusion of not understanding why he had been left in the cold. All of it lived within the shadow. It had never left him. It had waited, buried, whispering at the edges of his heart. Tears pricked his closed eyes, for he understood then that the shadow was not here to destroy him. It was here to be acknowledged. When he opened his eyes, he stepped forward instead of back. His paws met the darkened grass, and though fear still flickered within him, he did not allow it to command his steps. The shadow rose higher, curling, into the vague shape of a towering beast, its featureless face looming above him. He lifted his gaze, steady, unyielding, and whispered, not in words, but in the quiet language of the heart, "I see you." The effect was immediate. The shadow stilled, its trembling halted. For the first time, it did not advance, but hovered, uncertain. The pup, small in stature but vast in presence, held its gaze, refusing to turn away. He let the pain surface, let the memories ache, but he did not hide from them. He accepted them as part of his path, part of his truth. And as the silence deepened, the shadow began to unravel, threads of smoke peeling away like fabric caught in a gentle wind. The blossoms brightened faintly as the darkness thinned, their colors returning, their petals lifting. The hum faded into a sigh, soft and almost tender, before vanishing altogether. What remained was not emptiness, but a subtle warmth, as though the shadow had returned to where it belonged, not destroyed, but integrated. The mentor finally moved, a single step forward, its eyes glimmering with approval. No voice echoed in his mind, no grand pronouncement was made. Only a nod, slow and deliberate, that carried more weight than 1,000 words. The lesson was clear. True strength did not come from denying what hurt, but from carrying it with grace. The pup's chest swelled with quiet pride, not of victory but of understanding. He had not banished the darkness. He had embraced it. And in that embrace he felt lighter, as though a chain had fallen away, leaving him freer than he had ever known. When he awoke, dawn was not yet near. The boy stirred restlessly in his sleep, caught in some small dream of his own, and the pup nestled closer, resting his head on the boy's chest. He listened to the steady heartbeat beneath his ear, and for the first time he truly understood its rhythm. It was the sound of belonging, the sound of love, the sound of a world worth protecting. The trial had changed him, though no one else could see it yet. His family would still see the devoted dog at their side, the gentle companion at their table. But inside he carried something more, the knowledge that he could face what lingered in the quiet corners of his heart, and that facing it made him whole. The night had shown him his first trial, and he had met it not with teeth or claw, but with stillness, courage, and acceptance. He knew there would be more shadows to come, each one carrying a different truth, each one demanding a deeper strength. But for now, he rested, wrapped in the warmth of his boy, and allowed sleep to hold him once more, steady and kind. For the silence had spoken, and he had listened. Morning light spilled gently through the curtains, soft and golden, touching the edges of the boy's room like a blessing. The pup awoke to it, still pressed close to the boy's chest, listening to that steady rhythm of breath that had comforted him through the night. The trial still echoed in his heart, the shadow's whisper, the silent nod of his mentor, but in the waking world it seemed quieter, folded deep inside him where no one could see. Yet something subtle had shifted, a presence within him that guided the way he moved, the way he looked at those he loved. The boy stirred, his hand falling lazily over the pup's back. Even in half-sleep, the touch was trusting, effortless, as though it had always belonged there. The pup stretched, pressing into the warmth of it, and in that moment he felt the lessons of the dream reflected in the smallest of gestures. He had faced his own shadow, embraced it, and now here he was, anchored to a child who saw no darkness in him, only light, only devotion. It was as if the two worlds, dream and waking, had begun to overlap. As days passed, the boy began to notice the pup's watchfulness. He laughed when the pup sat too long at the doorway, ears twitching, or when he tilted his head at sounds that no one else could hear. To the boy, it was endearing, a sign of cleverness, of curiosity. But to the pup, it was practice. Every whisper of wind, every creak of the wooden floor, every heartbeat around him became part of the silence he had learned to listen to. What the boy saw as a playful tilt of the head was in truth a gathering of meaning, an understanding of rhythms hidden beneath the surface of ordinary life. Their bond deepened in ways neither could explain. The boy began speaking more freely to him, not expecting answers, only comfort in the listening. "Sometimes," the boy whispered at night, "I feel like you understand more than anyone." And in his own way, the pup did. He could not grasp every word, but he understood the weight behind them, the loneliness, the dreams, the fears, too small to be voiced aloud. He leaned closer, pressing his warmth into the boy's side, offering not solutions but presence. And often that was enough. The mother watched with quiet tenderness, her songs filling the evenings with soft, lingering notes. The pup began to notice that her lullabies carried a cadence like the hum of the dream's unseen water, soothing and eternal. Her voice folded into his lessons, reminding him that not all wisdom came from shadows and trials. Some came from love, expressed in gentle repetition, in the way she tucked the boy's blanket or hummed into the stillness of dusk. Each sound was a thread in the fabric of belonging, binding them together in ways that could not be undone. But beneath this deepening comfort, the pup sensed something stirring. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but his sharpened awareness caught it like a scent carried on a faraway breeze. The world outside their home felt restless, charged, as though the shadows he had met in dreams were beginning to stretch their fingers toward the waking world. He did not yet know how or when, but he could feel the tension gathering at the edges of his quiet days. One evening, as the boy played in the garden, laughter bubbling like a spring, the pup sat nearby, watching the wind move through the trees. For a moment, he swore he saw the branches sway, not with the natural rhythm of the breeze, but with a deliberate shiver, as if something unseen passed among them. His ears pricked, his body tensed, yet the boy remained carefree, tossing a stick and running barefoot across the grass. The pup followed, not with the eagerness of a game, but with the steady vigilance of one who carried a secret. That night, the dream returned. The garden was brighter than before, its blossoms alive with gentle light, but at the far edge, a faint shimmer rippled the air. The mentor appeared as always, silent and patient, and though it spoke no words, the message was unmistakable. The bond with the boy was not just love, it was purpose. The trial had been his alone, but what came next would not be. His path was no longer only about himself. It was about protecting the one who unknowingly carried his heart. The pup lowered his head in acknowledgement, a vow forming silently within him. Whatever darkness lingered beyond the horizon, whatever shadows whispered at the edge of his sight, he would not let them touch the boy. Not while he had breath, not while he had strength. When he woke, the boy was once again curled beside him, arm draped loosely, hair tousled across the pillow. The pup stared at him for a long while, memorizing every detail as though it were the very map of his destiny. And in the quiet of that early hour, he felt something settle within him. Not fear, not restlessness, but a deeper calm. It was the calm of knowing why he was here, of knowing that the lessons of silence and shadow were not for his sake alone. They were for the boy, for the family, for the fragile world that pulsed with love in small, unseen ways. The bond had deepened beyond companionship. It had become a promise, unspoken but unbreakable. And though the pup could not foresee the full shape of what was to come, he was ready to walk toward it, guided by silence, anchored by love, carrying within him both light and shadow. And somewhere, at the edge of sleep, the faint hum returned, not menacing this time, but steady, like a reminder that every bond, once formed, carries both a gift and a responsibility. The pup curled closer, letting the boy's warmth wrap around him, and closed his eyes with the certainty that whatever the world brought, they would face it together. The days that followed were filled with the kind of simple joys that seemed eternal. The boy running barefoot through the garden, his laughter carrying like sunlight through leaves, the mother humming softly as she worked, the pup trailing faithfully, never far from their side. Yet beneath that fragile peace, something subtle had begun to shift. The pup felt it first, in the way the nights grew heavier, the air pressing down with a quiet weight that had no source. His sharpened senses caught it in the small pauses between sounds, the way the wind would suddenly still, the way silence would stretch too long, as though holding its breath. The world was whispering, though no one else seemed to notice. It began with dreams that were different from the garden. Instead of blossoms and water, he found himself in vast fields of shadow, where the ground seemed endless and the sky was heavy with unmoving clouds. He would walk, paws pressing against the dark earth, and feel the hum of something approaching. Not the soft hum of his first trial, but something jagged, uneven, restless. Each time he turned, he caught only a glimpse, a flicker at the edges, a movement that vanished before he could name it. The mentor never appeared in these dreams, leaving him alone to face the unease. And though he woke each time in the safety of the boy's bed, the echo clung to him like a shadow he could not shake. During the day, small signs began to bleed into waking life. One evening, as the boy sat in the yard carving shapes into the dirt with a stick, the pup froze at the sight of the family's fence. A section of it was trembling, though the air was still. He growled softly, ears sharp, but when the boy followed his gaze, the shaking stopped. The boy only laughed and nudged him playfully, dismissing it as nothing. But the pup did not forget. Another time. As the mother hummed her evening song, her voice wavered, not from fatigue, but as though something had brushed against it, interrupting its flow. The pup's fur prickled, his head snapping toward the darkened hallway, yet he saw only shadows pooling against the walls. He remained tense long after the moment passed, long after the mother had returned to her melody. He knew then that what lingered at the edge of his dreams was no longer confined to sleep. It was searching, pressing, testing the veil that separated worlds. Still, he did not abandon the boy's side. If anything, he drew closer, his presence constant and watchful. The boy began to notice his seriousness and sometimes frowned, pressing his small hand against the pup's chest, as though trying to ease whatever worry weighed on him. "It's okay," the boy would whisper. "You don't have to protect me all the time." But the pup knew better. He understood now that love and vigilance could not be separated. To protect was to love, and to love was to protect. One night, as the household slept, the pup awoke to a sound that was not a sound at all. It was a pulse, faint but steady, echoing from somewhere outside the window. He rose silently, padding across the floor, ears tilted toward the glass. Beyond the curtain, The world seemed drenched in silver light, the moon resting low, the garden stretched in stillness. And yet, there it was again. A thrum, like a heartbeat that did not belong to anything alive. He pressed his nose to the window and saw it. At the far edge of the yard, where the trees thickened into shadow, the air shimmered faintly, like heat rising from stone. For an instant, he thought he saw a shape within it, tall and formless, bending as though listening. His chest tightened. It was no dream. The echoes had crossed into the waking world. He wanted to bark, to alert the family, but something deeper told him not to. The figure had not yet stepped forward. It was watching, testing, waiting. If he revealed he had seen it, it might move too soon, before he was ready. Instead, he returned. To the boy's side, curling close, though his eyes remained open, glowing faintly in the dark. Sleep returned reluctantly, and when it did, he found himself back in the dream garden. The blossoms were dim once more, and the mentor stood there, silent as always, yet this time the stillness carried urgency. The pup lowered his head, ears flat, as if asking the question he could not voice. What should I do? The mentor raised one hand, slow, deliberate, and gestured not outward but inward, placing it gently against its chest. The meaning rippled through him like water, spreading over stone. The strength he needed was not beyond him. It was within him, in the silence he had embraced, in the bond he carried. The boy, the family, the love that anchored him. These were not weaknesses. They were the very shield and sword he would need when the shadow crossed fully into his world. He awoke before dawn, the boy stirring softly, unaware of the silent battles unfolding around them. The pup pressed closer, eyes half closed, yet alert. The echoes of danger were no longer distant. They were here, present, breathing just beyond the walls of safety. But he was not afraid. He was ready, even if readiness meant only waiting, listening, and guarding the fragile rhythm of the boy's sleep. For the first time, the danger had touched the waking world, and the pup knew there was no turning back. What had begun as whispers in dreams had become a presence in the night air. And though the family still lived in the comfort of their ordinary days, he could feel the path shifting beneath them. The silence would guide him. The bond would strengthen him. And when the shadow finally stepped forward, he would be there, watchful, steadfast, unyielding. The night that followed unfolded differently, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The pup felt it before he saw it, the subtle tightening of the air, the way the crickets fell silent all at once, the hush that spread over the garden like a veil. His body stiffened, every sense sharpened, and though the boy slept soundly against him, warm and untroubled, the pup could not rest. Something was moving closer, no longer content to linger at the edges of sight. He rose quietly, slipping from the boy's side without waking him. His paws touched the floor like whispers, carrying him toward the window where silver light spilled across the curtains. Pulling them aside, he looked out and saw it. The same shimmer he had glimpsed before, but stronger now, its edges sharper, its glow unsettling. It pulsed faintly, as though breathing, and each pulse rippled across the garden, bending the grass in waves that had no wind behind them. This time he did not wait. The pup padded softly to the door, nudging it open with his nose until the night air wrapped around him. The garden stretched wide and familiar, yet every flower, every blade of grass seemed changed under the weight of the shimmer. the pup's eyes fixed on the far edge where shadows pooled thickest. He lowered himself into a crouch, ears pricked, tail stiff, not with aggression, but with readiness. The shimmer quivered, then parted, and from within it stepped a figure. Unlike the mentor of his dreams, this being carried no calm. Its body shifted constantly, as if it could not decide what form to take, stretching and collapsing, arms becoming branches, then smoke, then nothing at all. It had no face, only hollows, where eyes should have been, glowing faintly with an unnatural light. It was not of the waking world, yet here it stood, pressing itself into the soil of his garden. The pup growled low, a sound meant not to threaten but to declare, "I see you." His heart thudded with fear. Yes, but beneath the fear there was something steadier. The lessons of silence, the embrace of his shadow, the bond with the boy. All of it lived in him now, steadying his pause, anchoring his breath. He would not turn away. The figure tilted its hollow head, as if curious, and stepped closer. The grass withered beneath its shifting feet, the air trembling with each movement. The pup did not retreat. Instead, he stepped forward too, small against its looming presence, but grounded in a strength far greater than size. For a long moment, they regarded one another, the being of shifting shadow and the pup of flesh and bone, light and love. It was then the pup understood. This was not a battle of teeth and claws. It was a confrontation of will, of presence. The creature fed on fear, on silence, twisted into emptiness. To yield would be to invite it deeper into the world. To stand would be to deny its claim. Drawing a breath, the pup closed his eyes for just a moment, listening as he had been taught. He heard the stillness of the night, the faint hum of the earth beneath his paws, the memory of the boy's heartbeat pressed against his chest. And when he opened his eyes again, they glowed faintly, reflecting not the hollow light of the intruder, but the quiet fire of resolve. He barked once, sharp and clear, breaking the hush that had gripped the garden. The sound echoed unnaturally, stretching farther than it should have, carrying into the shimmer like a stone dropped into water. The figure faltered, its form flickering, rippling as though unsettled. The pup did not stop. He stepped closer, each paw a statement, each breath a refusal to yield. Another bark tore from his chest, not wild, not panicked, but steady, purposeful. The being shuddered, its form collapsing into smoke before reforming again. It stepped back, and with that retreat the shimmer weakened, the pulsing light dimming. The pup's heart pounded, but he pressed forward, holding the line between the intruder and the home behind him. He thought not of himself, but of the boy sleeping within, of the family who had given him warmth, of the love that made him more than he had ever believed he could be. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the figure recoiled. Its shape collapsed, inward, sucked back into the shimmer, which quivered violently before dissolving into the night air. The garden fell still, the grass lifting as though released from its weight, the silence softening into something natural once more. The pup stood, alone beneath the moonlight, chest heaving, paws planted firm. The confrontation had ended without a fight, but not without meaning. He had faced what crossed the boundary, and though it had not been defeated, it had been turned back for now. When he returned to the boy's side, slipping quietly into the warmth of the bed, he felt the boy stir, murmuring softly as if sensing his return. The pup curled close, resting his head, where he could hear the familiar rhythm of the child's heartbeat. His eyes stayed open longer than usual, listening to the quiet, making sure the night had truly settled. He knew this was only the beginning. The shadows had tested the edges, seeking a way in. They would come again, stronger, more insistent. But he also knew that he was not the same pup who had once trembled at the thought of being small and forgotten. He had grown. He had listened. And when the world called for him, he had answered. Sleep came slowly, carrying him back into a dream, where the garden awaited. The blossoms glowed once more, and the mentor stood watching. No words were given, only a single nod, the same as before, yet now it carried the weight of acknowledgement. He had taken his first true step into the path that was his to walk, and so the pup slept, cradled in both dream and reality, protector of a fragile world bound by silence, strengthened by love, ready for what was yet to come. The morning that followed carried a different weight than the ones before. The garden, though bathed in golden light, seemed quieter, as if reluctant to forget what had unfolded in the night. The pup awoke before the boy, his ears twitching at every creak of the house, every whisper of wind. He lay still for a while, eyes open, listening not only to the room, but to something deeper, a current that hummed beneath the world. It was not the same silence he once feared, nor the same stillness he had come to accept. This was heavier, watchful, as if the night had left its shadow behind. When the boy stirred and reached out to him, the pup pressed closer, his nose against the child's cheek, and felt the innocent warmth of sleep still clinging to him. The boy smiled without waking fully, a simple gesture, but in that moment it steadied the pup more than any dream had. He realized then that what he carried was no longer just his own fear or strength. It was the boy's safety, the trust placed in him without words. That bond was both his shield and his burden. Throughout the day, the pup's senses remained sharp. Every rustle in the bushes made his head turn. Every passing shadow across the window held his gaze a heartbeat too long. He did not leap to conclusions or bark needlessly, but his watchfulness deepened. The family noticed, commenting softly on how alert he had become, how he seemed older somehow, more aware. The boy, though too young to understand the weight behind those eyes, sensed it too. He would place his small hand on the pup's head more often, as if trying to comfort him, though the comfort always flowed both ways. The garden itself had changed. At the edges, where the shimmer had pressed, the grass seemed slower to rise, the soil darker, as though touched by something unwilling to let go. Flowers turned their faces to the sun, but drooped as evening drew near, wary of what might come again. The pup walked those edges often, nose low to the ground, tracing the faint trails that lingered. They were not scents in the way he knew them. No earth, no animal, no wind. They were hollow imprints like footsteps made of absence, and though invisible to others, he felt them clearly. As twilight fell once more, he did not wait for sleep to carry him into dreams. He sat in the garden with the boy, who played with sticks and stones, laughing as children do. The pup's body was still, but his mind traced the boundary between light and dark, waiting for a sign. He wanted to believe the night would pass quietly, but deep inside he knew the shadows never retreated forever. They had tested him once and would test him again, perhaps differently, perhaps stronger. When the stars emerged, he thought of the figure he had faced, the hollow eyes, the shifting form, the way it recoiled from his bark. It had not vanished in defeat. It had retreated with intent, as though measuring him, weighing his resolve. That thought unsettled him. yet it also ignited something he had never known before: purpose. Fear could gnaw at him, yes, but it could no longer define him. He was no longer merely small or silent. He was a guardian. Later, when the boy drifted into sleep, the pup lingered awake at the window. The moon rose high, spilling silver over the earth, and in its light he caught the faintest flicker across the distant trees. It was not the full shimmer he had seen before, only a hint, a reminder. His body stiffened, but he did not growl. Instead, he watched, ears pricked, steady as stone. The flicker lingered, then faded, leaving behind only the hum of crickets and the cool whisper of the breeze. The pup exhaled slowly, realizing the truth. The shadows would not always come with great force. Sometimes they would only brush the edges of the world, reminding him they were near, waiting for a moment of weakness. This was the weight of vigilance, not constant battle, but constant readiness, a burden unseen by those he protected, but carried with quiet strength nonetheless. As dawn approached, the pup allowed his body to rest beside the boy once more. His eyes closed, though lightly, never fully surrendering. Sleep came in fragments, drifting between the warmth of the child and the faint echoes of the dream garden, where blossoms glowed and silence sang. There too his mentor waited, not with words of comfort this time, but with a gaze that seemed heavier, expectant, as if asking a question without speaking. The pup did not answer aloud, but his heart offered what it could. "I am ready." When morning broke, the boy greeted the pup, with laughter, running into the garden with careless joy. The pup followed, his paws pressing into the earth where shadows once lingered, as though staking a claim. The world looked ordinary to all who lived in it, but to him it was layered with unseen truths, with dangers that might stir, and with light that must be protected. He moved with a new steadiness, not just as a companion, but as a sentinel. The days ahead would not be simple. He knew the hollows would return, perhaps not tonight, perhaps not tomorrow, but in time. They had tasted the boundary and would not forget it. Yet, as he watched the boy's laughter rise into the morning air, the pup felt no despair. What he carried was heavy, but within it lay strength. Each beat of the boy's heart, each step in the sunlight, was proof of what he defended. And that, he thought, was enough to endure the shadows for as long as he must. The garden bloomed anew in the morning light, fragile and radiant, and the pup stood at its heart, silent, steady, and unyielding. The weight of vigilance was his to bear, and he bore it willingly, for love had made him stronger than fear ever could. The days slipped by with an uneasy rhythm, each one draped in the fragile peace of mornings and the quiet tension of nights. Though the sun still warmed the garden and laughter still rang from the boy's small voice, the pup could feel the balance shifting. The earth beneath his paws hummed differently now, as if it carried the memory of those hollow presences and waited for their return. The boy noticed nothing, lost in play and wonder, but the pup's eyes followed every shadow, his ears twitched to every faint murmur of the world. He knew the stillness could not last. It began subtly, with small changes others would have missed. The flowers that once lifted eagerly toward the sun now tilted uneasily, their petals curling at the edges as though shying away from an unseen hand. At night, the air seemed heavier, carrying a weight that settled over the garden like a veil. Sometimes the pup would catch a flicker at the far end of the yard, not a full shimmer, but a distortion, as though the air itself held its breath. These signs were not enough to alarm the family, but they were enough to tell him that the boundary between the worlds was growing thin. One evening, as twilight bled into darkness, the boy tugged at the pup's fur and whispered about dreams. He could not understand. He spoke of voices that called his name but faded when he turned, of strange shapes that loomed at the edge of sleep. His words were innocent, spoken in the curious tone of a child, but to the pup they were confirmation. The shadows were no longer content to linger on the outside. They had begun to brush against the boy's dreams, testing the strength of his spirit. The pup pressed closer to him that night, refusing to leave his side even for a moment. He could not explain his fear, nor could he soothe the boy with promises he did not fully believe. All he could do was remain steady and present, a silent wall against whatever stirred beyond the veil. His heart thudded with the weight of a question he had not dared to ask himself before. How long could love alone hold back what was gathering? In sleep, he returned again to the dream garden. This time it was dimmer, the blossoms no longer glowing with the same brilliance, but faint, fragile, like stars fading before dawn. His mentor waited there, not with serenity but with solemnity, as if even in this place the shadow had begun to creep. The figure did not speak, yet the pup understood. The test was drawing near. He lowered his head, not in defeat, but in acceptance, knowing that what lay ahead would demand more than vigilance. It would demand sacrifice. When he awoke, the night was restless. The trees whispered, though no wind stirred, and the air felt charged, expectant. He rose quietly, moving through the house with cautious steps until he reached the window. Beyond the glass, the yard was cloaked in silver light, and there, at the farthest edge, he saw them. Not one figure, but several shapes, shifting like smoke, yet darker than shadow, moving in slow, deliberate rhythm. They did not cross the line of the garden, not yet, but their presence was undeniable. The pup's body stiffened, every instinct urging him to bark, to lunge, to drive them back as he had before, but something deeper held him still. This was not the time for noise or fury. These beings did not test his strength in the open. They sought cracks, weaknesses, places where silence might betray more than sound. He stood motionless, a sentinel in the dim light, his gaze unbroken. For long moments they lingered, their edges dissolving and reforming like mist, until at last they receded into the dark. Though they vanished, the pup knew they had not truly gone. Their retreat was not defeat, but a gathering, a quiet preparation. They would return in greater number with stronger intent. And when they did, it would not be the boy's laughter or the family's warmth alone that would shield them. It would be the courage he had nurtured in the stillness, the resolve that had grown from fear into love. The boy stirred in his sleep, murmuring words the pup could not understand. He pressed close again, resting his head on the child's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. That sound, soft and simple, anchored him. Whatever shadows gathered, whatever trials loomed, he knew this heartbeat was the reason. He stood watch, the reason he would not falter. The gathering shadows could circle, they could press, they could wait, but they would not take what was most precious, not while he still drew breath. And so the night passed, not with the silence
of peace, but with the silence of anticipation.
The pup did not close his eyes again until the first threads of dawn began to weave across the sky. Even then, his rest was shallow, a drift rather than a surrender. The shadows had made their presence known, and he understood the truth. The days of quiet watching were drawing to an end. Soon, The garden would no longer be enough to hold back what sought entry. Soon the test would deepen, and he would have to find within himself the strength to protect more than a boundary. Morning came with the same ordinary light as always, yet it felt different. The air carried the memory of the night, and though the family smiled and greeted the day with ease, the pup moved with a heavier step. He was no longer merely watching for shadows, he was preparing for them. Somewhere beyond sight, they were gathering, waiting, learning the shape of his love. And he knew with a quiet certainty that love alone would have to be forged into something stronger if it was to withstand what was coming. The morning light broke gently across the garden, as if it too sensed the fragility of the balance that lingered. Dew clung to each blade of grass, trembling, reflecting the dawn in tiny fragments of silver. The pup moved slowly through the yard, his paws leaving quiet impressions in the earth. He did not rush, nor did he play as he once did. Every step carried the weight of what he had seen, of the shadows that circled in silence. Yet there was also a softness in his stride, a quiet acceptance, as though he had begun to understand that his life was no longer just his own. The boy ran ahead of him, laughing as he chased the sunlight, unaware of the night's burden. The ski pup watched him with eyes that had grown older than his years. He remembered the boy's first clumsy steps, the times when he had tugged too hard at his fur, the nights they had fallen asleep together in the warm glow of lamplight. Each memory returned not as a distraction, but as a reminder. This was the reason he stood vigilant, the reason he bore the unseen weight without complaint. That night, when the house settled and quiet returned, the pup drifted into the dream garden once more. The blossoms there had dimmed further, their glow faint but persistent, like stars fighting to stay alive in a clouded sky. His mentor stood as always, silent and steady, but this time the pup felt the depth of the gaze upon him. It was not merely watchful. It was questioning, searching as though asking whether he truly understood what his path demanded. The pup lowered his head, not out of shame, but out of reverence. He did not need words to answer. His very presence here, his refusal to turn away, was the answer. He would stand, no matter the cost. The blossoms quivered as if stirred by a wind, and for a moment the garden brightened, enough to remind him that even in the deepest shadow, light remained possible. He awoke with that image burning quietly within him, like a candle that could not be snuffed out. In the waking world, the family carried on in their small routines, meals, laughter, the boys' endless games. To them, life had not changed. Yet the pup noticed the shifts in the air, the slight trembling of the earth at night, the way silence now seemed to carry a hum beneath it. The shadows were not pressing yet, but they were no longer distant. They gathered, and in their gathering, he felt the truth. He was preparing not just for a moment, but for a legacy. He began to move differently, not only watching, but guiding. When the boy wandered too close to the edge of the yard, the pup herded him gently back, pressing his nose against his leg. When the family left food unattended, he sniffed carefully before allowing the boy to eat, as though even the smallest act could carry hidden danger. His love had become discipline, his vigilance a ritual. He was no longer simply protecting the boy, he was shaping the boy's path, though the child could not yet see it. At times, weariness pressed hard against him. Nights without sleep, days of unbroken watching, the weight of silence. It might have been enough to crush him, if not for the bond that tethered him. In the still moments, when the boy curled against him in trust, he felt the strength return. Love replenished him in ways food and rest could not. It flowed through him like a river, endless, steady, unyielding. One evening, as dusk deepened, he stood at the garden's edge and looked outward. The horizon shimmered faintly, not with the brilliance of light, but with the suggestion of movement. He did not flinch this time. Instead he sat, his form outlined against the sinking sun, and let the shadows know he was there. His stillness was not weakness, it was declaration. He would not give way, not in silence, not in fear. The boy came to him then, tugging at his ear, laughing in the way only children can. The pup turned his head, pressing his nose into the boy's shoulder, breathing him in as if to etch the moment into his very being, for he knew now what the shadows sought. It was not the garden, nor the house, nor even himself. It was the light of innocence, the laughter unguarded, the love unbroken. That was what he defended, and that was what he would leave behind. No
matter the outcome of his watch. The night that followed was quiet, yet heavy with unspoken promises.
He lay close to the boy, listening to his steady breath, and thought of the path ahead. The legacy he built was not in walls or in battles, but in the simple truth of presence. To remain, to endure, to love without condition, that was his gift, and that would outlast even the shadows. And so, as sleep finally touched him, he dreamed not of battles won, but of a world where the boy grew older, stronger, carrying within him the quiet courage of a guardian who had never left his side. The dream was not for himself, but for the future, for what might bloom long after his watch had ended. The shadows might press closer, they might test and strain, but they could not take away what had already been planted deep in the boy's
heart. That, he knew, was the legacy of Snowfall, the gentle, unyielding love that covers the earth, even in the coldest night. Night fell gently, as if the sky itself wished to soften the world into rest.
The boy lay curled beneath his blanket, his breath slow and steady, while the pup remained close, eyes half closed but never fully surrendered to sleep. The weight he carried was no longer just vigilance. It had become something deeper, something woven into the rhythm of his being. The shadows had not pressed that night, yet their absence did not feel like mercy. It felt like patience, like a lull in a song that would return in its own time. And still the pup stayed ready, heart anchored to the small warmth beside him. In his drifting half-sleep, he returned once more to the dream garden. This time it was different. The blossoms that had once dimmed now glowed faintly again, not in bright defiance but in soft resilience, like embers refusing to fade. A breeze stirred the air, carrying a lullaby without words, a tune that hummed deep into his chest. His mentor stood there as always, but now there was a gentleness in the figure's gaze, as though something long unspoken was finally acknowledged. The pup understood then that he had already become what he was meant to be, not through power or defiance, but through steadfast love. The garden stretched endlessly before him, fading into mist, and for the first time he did not fear its vastness. He walked slowly through it, paws brushing over petals that glowed faintly beneath his steps. The silence here was no longer heavy, no longer a burden. It was peace. And in that peace he realized that his presence, his love, had become part
of something larger. Even if his body tired, even if his watch grew heavy, the bond he had forged would not end.
It would ripple outward, carried in the boy's laughter, in the quiet strength the child would one day grow into. Legacy was not an end, It was a song that lingered. When he awoke, the night outside was hushed, the moon hanging low as though listening. The pup lifted his head, ears pricked, but no shimmer appeared, no hollow figures lingered at the edge. The world was calm, yet he felt the weight of something approaching, not as threat, but as transition. It was as though the very air whispered that nothing lasts unchanged, not fear, not shadow, not even the guardianship of a single soul. All things flowed onward, softened by time, carried into memory. He looked at the boy's sleeping face, serene and untroubled, and pressed his nose gently against his hand. The child stirred, murmured something too soft to understand, and returned to dreams. In that moment the pup felt it clearly. One day his watch would end, but the love he left behind would never vanish. It would settle into the boy's heart like snowfall on quiet earth, shaping him in ways he might never see but would always carry. That was the true song, the true lullaby, love that endured beyond presence. The hours slipped by, and the pup allowed himself, for the first time in many nights, to close his eyes fully. Sleep held him, not with the sharp edge of vigilance, but with the gentle arms of trust. He dreamed not of battles, not of shadows, but of open skies where the boy ran free, laughter rising like birdsong. He dreamed of sunlight breaking through, clouds of rivers carrying reflections into forever, of stars whispering down their patient light. And within it all, he dreamed of himself, not as a fighter, not as a sentinel, but as a quiet presence folded into the fabric of love itself. When as dawn arrived, its light felt softer, as if the world itself had shifted slightly. The boy awoke, bright and eager, racing into the garden, calling for him. The pup followed, slower now but steady. He watched the child spin in the sunlight, joy unbroken, and his chest swelled with a strange, bitter-sweet warmth. This was what he had fought for, not the silence of victory, but the continuation of laughter, of innocence, of hope. Even the shadows, with all their persistence, could never take that away. As the day moved on, he lingered often in stillness, not out of fatigue, but reflection. He had begun to feel himself as more than body and bone, more than paw and fur. He was the quiet strength in the boy's smile, the steady calm in the family's home. He was the lullaby woven through the air at night, unseen yet present, eternal in its own way. His watch might one day end, but the love within it would not. That evening, as the sky deepened once again and stars began their patient glow, the pup lay close to the boy and let his eyes close fully. No shadows came. No shimmer broke the horizon. The night carried only stillness, and within that stillness a soft truth rose. His presence had already become forever. Even if tomorrow brought change, even if the path ahead carried farewells, the song he had woven into this world would remain. And so he drifted into sleep with peace in his chest, the lullaby of forever humming quietly in his heart, promising that love, once given, never truly fades. The night air carried a hush so complete it felt like the world itself was pausing to listen. The boy, exhausted from his laughter and play, had curled again into the warmth of his bed, his breaths rising and falling with the rhythm of dreams. Beside him, the pup rested in silence, his chest lifting slowly, his heart steady though his body had grown weary. The stars stretched above, ancient and knowing, their soft light spilling into the quiet room as though to bless the stillness. Yet within that stillness, the pup sensed the edge of something new, an ending that was not sorrowful, but inevitable, like the final note of a song that lingers in the heart long after it is gone. He did not fear it. Instead, he felt it as a kind of completion, a circle closing with tenderness. His vigil had been long, his watch unbroken, and though shadows had pressed at the boy's life again and again, they had not succeeded. They had been met with love, with patience, with the quiet, unwavering strength of a small creature who refused to surrender. That, he realized now, was his true gift. Not victory, not defiance, but presence. Presence that endured when the night was heavy, presence that stayed when the world trembled. The dream garden returned to him as he drifted at the edge of sleep, but this time it was brighter than ever before. Blossoms glowed with steady fire, their petals trembling with the breeze of unseen wings. The river that had once been dark now shimmered with threads of silver, carrying reflections of stars across its surface. His mentor stood once more upon the bridge, yet no longer distant, no longer shrouded in silence. Instead, the figure reached out a hand, not in command, but in recognition. The pup stepped forward without hesitation, paws touching the wood that gleamed with light, and he felt himself welcomed, not as a student, not as a fighter, but as one who had fulfilled his part in the endless story. In that garden, he understood something more. His life had never been only about guarding one boy, though that had been his heart's purpose. It was about showing that love, in its purest form, was stronger than fear, that even the smallest being could shape the path of another, not through words or power, but through the constancy of care. His mentor's eyes told him this truth, and when the breeze carried petals across his fur, he felt no weight upon his shoulders anymore. The burden had become light, transformed into something eternal. He awoke once more, this time with a clarity that soothed him. The boy still slept, his hand outstretched, as though reaching in dreams. The pup placed his paw gently against it, sealing a bond that needed no words. He did not know how many more nights would follow, but he knew that each one would carry this same love. Even when his body one day grew too tired to rise, the essence of that love would remain, flowing unseen, guiding the boy as he grew into the man he was meant to be. The stars outside seemed to pulse gently, as though singing their approval. The shadows did not come that night, nor the next. Perhaps they had accepted what he already knew, that some bonds could not be broken, not by time, not by silence, not even by endings. The boy's laughter, the family's warmth, the quiet sanctuary of their home, all of it had been woven into a tapestry of love that no darkness could unravel. The pup had been a thread in that tapestry, and though his part might fade from sight, it would remain forever within the whole. He closed his eyes again, not out of exhaustion, but peace. His dreams were clear this time, filled not with gardens or battles, but with simple moments, running in fields of gold beside the boy, chasing butterflies beneath the summer sun, curling into warmth during winter storms, listening to stories told by firelight. Each memory was a jewel, each heartbeat a note in the lullaby he had been weaving since the day he first laid his head by the child's side. And now the lullaby was nearly complete. Morning came with a quiet radiance, spilling through the window, like gentle hands. The boy awoke and wrapped his arms around the pup, laughing with the joy only a child knows, and in that embrace the pup felt everything, past, present, and all that would come. He understood then that endings were not loss, but transformation. His watch might someday end, but the song would continue in the boy's heart, carried forward, sung again in ways unseen. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the world, in amber light, the pup lay down beside the boy once more. His breaths were slow, his eyes heavy, but his heart was full. The lullaby he had carried was ready to rest, but its melody would never fade. It would echo in laughter, in memory, in love that stretched beyond time. And so, as the boy drifted into dreams and the stars kindled once again in the night sky, the pup closed his eyes with peace. His journey had been simple, yet infinite. He had been a guardian, a friend, a silent keeper of love. And now his legacy would carry on softer than a whisper, brighter than a star, eternal as the night itself.